Hello everybody. I haven't done a video for a couple of weeks now, but I thought I'd give it a go to do another one. If you go on my channel, you would have seen some drinks videos. I've moved those onto a separate channel because I wanted to keep this exclusively Berlin, Germany and World War II related, that kind of stuff. And post-war as well, of course. And I'd like to tell the story on Hanna, and this is a book that I've got here by Jackie Lomax, Hanna, and she was a test pilot, famous test pilot during World War II. She flew gliders, she flew special helicopters, and she was a test pilot to the Messerschmitts that she won special medals for, because in one of the tests she crashed and it almost took her life. So towards the end of the war, Ritter von Grimm, who was a general who had a kind of relationship with Hanna, we don't know to what extent, but I'm sure they were quite discreet about it. And von Grimm asked Hanna if she would accompany him to Berlin. So this was I think April 25th, so the war was coming to a close, and things were rather desperate. And Hanna said yes, and Ritter, who's a gentleman of the old school, went and approached her parents and asked if it was alright if Hanna would accompany him to Berlin, because it would be a very dangerous mission, and said that that they felt it was her duty to do so. She then gave her farewells, bid her farewells, and also her sister's children. She had 3 children, and so there were her nephews and nieces, and she wanted to see them because she felt that it may be the last time that she would see them. So they made their way to Munich. There was near Munich. There's an airport, an airfield there, and they flew from there to Rechlin. I think it's Rechlin. I'm not sure if that's pronounced it correctly. And there they waited, I believe, two days, I believe it was. There was a special helicopter that they hoped to fly into Berlin with. This helicopter sort of was a cross between, it's not like the helicopters that we recognise, but they're helicopters that are sort of a cross between a plane and a helicopter. And if I can show you, I've got a picture here of what one looked like. Let's see. There we go. See that picture there? That one there. So it's got like 3 propellers. It's got like a propeller on where the wings are, so you've got 2 rotary blades. If I show you, 2 rotary blades on where the wings are, and then you've got a propeller at the front. Now before the war, she would fly it as a kind of like a demonstration of what this thing can do, because before the war it wasn't really well known that there were such helicopters in existence. And into the Deutschlandhalle, and during the course of the war, tragically, the Deutschlandhalle, which is a hall, was destroyed by the Allied bombing. When they got to Rechlin, I believe what happened was that the helicopter that they wanted to use was destroyed, and I think this was for them, this was sort of luck in disguise, because there would have been a chance that had they chose to fly in by helicopter, it would have they would have been shot down. So anyway, they from Reitsch they flew to Gatow. Gatow was the only airfield available in Berlin that hadn't been overrun by the Soviet Union, and they flew there with about 30 or 40 fighters, and tragically most of those fighters got shot down. So you could see how precarious and how dangerous this trip really was turning out to be. So when they got to Gatow, there was I think it's called a Fischler. I've got it written down here. Feisler Storch. It's a Feisler Storch. So the plane they flew into was a Fokker-Wulf, and she had to squeeze into the fuselage. And her being rather small and petite, she was able to do it, but it was so difficult for her because it was so nauseous that she was literally counting the minutes as to when that plane would land. But they eventually did land at Gatow, and from Gatow they took the Feisler Storch, and from there they were able to fly into central Berlin. To do so, they were flying at treetop level. So they're flying at treetop level to avoid the fighters, Russian fighters that would easily shoot them down if they were to fly any higher. However, they had a lot of Russian troops on the ground, and they could see the aircraft. So they were taking pot shots and they were firing their machine guns and everything. And tragically, they were hit. So the fuel tanks were actually hit. So when they got to close to where they wanted to land, Ritter von Grimm was shot in the foot, and Hanna was able to take was able to steer the aircraft, because she was able to handle the throttle and steer the aircraft and land it. Was Ritter von Grimm was going in and out of consciousness, and every time he got into consciousness, he would try and grab the throttle, but she would steady the aircraft. And she said it was amazing that the aircraft itself didn't actually crash at that moment. There's a passage in the book that I really want to read, because it really gives a fantastic description of what they were going through when they were flying into central Berlin. So what I'll do is I'll read it for you. It says, "The plane rose smoothly from the ground, and von Grimm kept her as low as he possibly could. I remember noticing with a sudden longing how remote and peaceful the waters of the Wannsee looked, gleaming silver in the failing light. But the scene only flickered across my consciousness, as my whole being was riveted with animal concentration on the dangers surrounding us on all sides. We reached the Grunewald without interference, almost brushing the treetops to avoid detection by the enemy fighters, and they were now appearing above us. Then suddenly, from the bowels of the earth, from the lurking shadows, from the very treetops themselves, leapt the full fury and force of hell's fire, concentrated from every quarter, it seemed, on us alone. Below us, Russian tanks and soldiers were swarming among the trees. I could see the men's faces clearly as they aimed rifles, Tommy guns, and anti-tank weapons in our direction. In the sky immediately around us, there were hundreds of deadly little explosive puffs. Then suddenly there was a rending crash. I saw yellow and white flames streak out behind the engine, and at the same time von Grimm shouted that he had been hit. An armor-piercing bullet had smashed through his right foot. Mechanically, I stretched over his shoulder and seized the throttle and stick, and struggled with all I was worth, to keep the machine twisting and turning to avoid the fire. Von Grimm had crumpled into his seat, unconscious. The air around us was so explosive that even the noise of our own engine was drowned. I gasped with horror as I caught sight of the petrol running from both wing tanks. An explosion seemed imminent, I thought. In fact, I was amazed that I hadn't been one already. Yet the plane still answered to the controls, and I was still untouched, although a number of shells hit the plane. My chief concern was for von Grimm. Several times he started up, his hands grasping from convulsive energy from the stick, and then dropping as he again lost consciousness. We were approaching the radio tower. The evil-smelling, sulphurous air whirled thicker and thicker, and smoke, dust and fumes. Visibility was almost nil. The ground fire was slackening, and the area seemed, at any rate, to be still in German hands. It was here that my training flights over Berlin proved their use. To have blown around searching for landmarks would have been asking for trouble. But fortunately this was unnecessary, as I could remember the compass bearing from the Ack Tower, which lay directly on our route. It's a brilliant description. She was able to see the victory column, and from the victory column she actually saw the road that she had to land, and by doing so she was able to land on the road in front of the Brandenburg Gate. Her being quite petite and small, she definitely struggled with von Grimm to get him out of the aircraft and to tend to his wounds. A short while later there were a number of troops in an armoured vehicle that saw them, and they were able to help von Grimm and herself into the armoured vehicle. From there they drove under the Brandenburg Gate into Paris Square, past the Adlon Hotel, and to Unter den Linden, which is under the lime trees. There they were able to turn right into Wilhelmstrasse, where all the ministerial buildings and government buildings were either partially or totally destroyed. They were able to drive up Wilhelmstrasse. On the right hand side was the old Reitsch Chancellery, and there they were able to turn right into Vossstrasse, which is Voss Street, into the straight to the Reichschancellery, and from there they were able to help von Grimm into the bunker. When they got into the bunker, Hanna was greeted by Mrs. Goebbels, Greta Goebbels, and they embraced. They didn't know each other, they hadn't met socially at any time, but they recognized each other from their photographs that were taken in, and you could see them in magazines and newspapers. So there wasn't any formal introduction between the two of them, and Mrs. Goebbels was in tears because she knew that this was the end. And from that meeting, Hanna went into the surgery where von Grimm lay, and Hitler appeared, and she was shocked by his appearance. He could the vigour of the Hitler that we recognise in all the documentaries and the rallies and speeches that he gave was not the Hitler that they saw. This was like a man stooped, his face ashen. He was staring blankly, and but he acknowledged how difficult the flying into Berlin was, and Hitler was very, very pleased that they made the attempt and that they came to see him. The reason was that that von Grimm was summoned was because of Goering, and Hitler felt betrayed that Goering would try and take over Germany and become the leader of Germany, and Hitler saw this as a betrayal because he said he wasn't dead yet. And so he made von Grimm the leader of the Luftwaffe by making him the commander-in-chief, and that he would make him a field marshal because he was a general at the time. But this was sort of like an empty promotion because we could all see that this was the end of the war, and he literally had his foot shot into to come to this perilous journey, only to be told by Hitler himself that he wanted to be head of the Luftwaffe. Hanna had the opportunity to actually freshen herself up, so she had a wash. And after the precarious journey that she took and the risks that she took, it was some sort of a relief. she could see how mad everything had sort of become, and any kind of sanity she was able to get was through seeing the children of the Goebbels. There were 6 children. They're all had their names were all of the started with the letter H, so you can understand how fanatical the Goebbels really were. But the tragedy was that those children wouldn't be able to leave the bunker alive. So what she did was she would sing them songs, teach them how to yodel. She would tell them stories. She'd tell them about how she flew and the countries that she visited. At some point, Hanna was able to go and visit von Grimm in the surgery to tend to his needs, and also to see what she could do for him, to make him more comfortable. But she didn't spend too much time with the others. She actually said that she didn't really like Eva Braun while she was there. I believe they were there for about 2 days, and they wanted to stay with Hitler to the end. So that sort of told me in some respects that they themselves were sort of falling into the vortex of madness. But eventually Hitler actually came and spoke to von Grimm, and he insisted that von Grimm and Hanna leave the bunker because he got a telegram saying that Hitler was trying to make peace with the Allies, and this was too much to bear for Hitler. He felt betrayed, and I think at this point he said that this truly was the end and he was going to take his life. So at this point they decided to leave the bunker, but Mrs. Goebbels actually came up to Hanna, gave her letters because she had a son from her first marriage, and she wanted to see that he would be all right, and which he was, because he was in a prisoner of war camp. She had a ring that she gave him, and there was also a letter that she took, which was from Eva Braun herself, that she wanted Hanna to actually give to her sister. So in the dead of night, about 12 o'clock midnight, they left the bunker, and at this point there was explosions going on all around. There was fire, there was smoke. I'm not too clear of how they actually got to the victory column, because there waiting for them was an Aradu aircraft. An Aradu, I don't know if I've pronounced it correctly, spelled A-R-A-D-O. And it was at the victory column. Now, I was there in Berlin, and I know the distance between where the bunker was, the Hitler bunker, and the victory column. I would say it was perhaps maybe 1,000 yards, maybe further. But I'm not sure how they got there, whether it was by foot or they were driven there. So that to me is not clear. Anyway, they got to the victory column where the Aradu was waiting for them, and there a pilot who had actually piloted them into Gatow was waiting for them. So he must have been anxious himself to get up into the air. But at this point it's really dangerous because of the enemy bombardment, and it was very accurate bombardment of the Reitsch Chancellery. The night sky was beamed with floodlights, searchlights. So they really needed to be very. They needed to get going, to get into the aircraft, to take off, which they managed to do, and avoid and be under gunfire, and to avoid the searchlights. This pretty much ends the story for me at this point, because after that, a month later, von Grimm actually took his life. He was going to be under arrest, and he was going to be sent to the UK, and from there he was going to go to the Nuremberg trials. But he took his own life because he felt it was the most honourable thing to do. Because Hitler actually gave them vials of poison, and he said you have a choice as to whether you want to use it or not. Okay, so there's a slight abrupt edit there. So the war comes to an end, and von Grimm and Hanna are effectively arrested. Now, Hanna was being seen to an American called Captain Robert Work, and he was the one that actually interrogated her, but it was more a kind of her giving a statement, because they wanted to know where Hitler what happened to Hitler at the end of the war, because they were suspecting that Hitler escaped and he'd gone to South America, which I can tell you now is just impossible, because he was so ill at that point. You know, he could barely walk for any distance because he'd have to sit down. So it was very, very precarious, the chances of him, and especially so late in the day. Ideally, he should have left April 22nd if that's what he wanted to get away from Berlin, because that was the perfect time to have gone. So a month after, so in May I believe, von Grimm took his life. He was going to be arrested, and he was going to be flown off to the UK, and then to the Nuremberg trials, but he took what he believed to be the honourable way out, and Hanna was offered the opportunity to go to the United States, which she had 3 days to think about it, but she decided against it, because they were saying that she could end up being a very rich woman if she went. And this was called Operation Paperclip. So there were a lot of ex-Nazis that actually went to the United States to work for the American government, or for the Secret Service, which is the United States government. And but she decided against it. So there was a gentleman by the name of Captain Robert Work, who interviewed Hanna, and she gave statements to say what actually happened in those last days when she was there. And you have to understand Hanna's situation, because the war was lost, Hitler took his life, von Grimm took his life, the tragedy of those 6 children, them being murdered by their parents. Her own parents took their own lives at the end of the war, and so she must have been in a right state. And I think Captain Robert Work, so you have to give him credit, because he was quite understanding about this. But he did tell her that the CIC, that are the counter intelligence corps, were not going to treat her with kids' gloves. Where she was able to stay in an apartment when she was being interviewed by Captain Work, she would end up being locked in a cell, and she was writing things on a wall. So they gave her a hard time, but she survived, and she went on to lead her life. Now I'm going to pretty much end it there. There are a few things I want to say. Is I kept saying during the first part of this video Mrs. Goebbels, where I should have said Magda Goebbels, or I should have said Frau Goebbels. The second part, the second thing I noted was that I said Hitler when I should have said Himmler. So it's Himmler that portrayed Hitler. Excuse me. So that was the slip up I made in the first part of this video. So I'm going to conclude it there. So I'm going to do more of these Hitler bunker video presentations. The next one I'd like to do is about The Lady Vanishes. It's going to be called The Lady Vanishes, which is all to do with spying. So I want to be able to talk about that in the next video presentation. So I'm going to finish off now. So in conclusion, I hope you stick around, I hope you'll subscribe, and I wish you all and bid you all a farewell. Auf Wiedersehen.